Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sarah Stein, and I have the great privilege of editing Anne Hillerman for Harper. To me, this is actually like a very personal relationship that Anne is not at all aware of. Growing up, my parents were huge Tony Hillerman fans, so I grew up with all of the Tony Hillerman books on shelves. Like, one of my dad's best friends actually lives in New Mexico now because he retired there because of his love of the landscape that Anne's father so vividly evoked in his writing. So for me now to be working with Anne, I feel as if I've known this world from some of the earliest adult books that I read as an 11, 12-year-old who was really excited about a good mystery. And now they're so much richer, so much more beautiful. And Anne herself grew up with the stories of her father, New York Times bestselling author Tony Hillerman, which he brought home from his work first as a journalist and later as a fiction writer. His storytelling and deep love of reading inspired both her parents and led Anne to her own career as a journalist and nonfiction writer. After her father's passing in 2008, Anne felt the loss of his beloved characters as deeply as his fans did. And those fans' passion for those stories inspired her to give the characters a second chance at life and develop one of his minor characters who has become a major character, in the one that Stargazer itself gives a really beautiful, rich life to, Chee Manuelito, into one of the central protagonists. Stargazer is her sixth novel, the 24th in the series, and I'm so thrilled to be talking with her about it in front of you guys. So to start us off, Anne, I'd love for you, so as I've said, these books are a journey not just from book to book to book, but also a journey from your father to you and his series to this new world that you've brought them into. Can you tell us how The Tale Teller, which was your previous novel, led to some of what you put into Stargazer?
Oh, sure. I would be glad to. But first, I want to thank you, Sarah, for joining me tonight. This is the first time Sarah and I have had a chance to look each other in the eye. So thank goodness for Zoom, and all these other platforms. And thanks to everybody out there who is spending part of their Friday evening with us. I mean, we know there's so many other things you could do, and we really appreciate it. So, Tale Teller was my fifth book. And that book was... let me backtrack a little. I was lucky enough to have inherited three major characters: Chee Manuelito, who is the main character in my new book, Stargazer, and then her husband, Jim Chee, and then Joe Leaphorn, who was the character with whom my dad began the series, more than 50 years ago. So in Tale Teller, Joe Leaphorn is the main character. And that story involves a very tragic event in the history of the Navajo Nation. It was known as the Long Walk, and that was when the U.S. government decided that the Navajo people should be removed from their traditional homeland and taken down to a really dreary spot in southern New Mexico and turned into farmers. And it was a disaster from the beginning. And eventually the Navajo people returned to their sacred land, and basically have thrived. They came back from that tragedy. Their population grew, their economy grew. But the Tale Teller, my book before this, as I was researching that, I realized that there were 2 or 3 bands of Navajo people who didn't return to the main reservation. They set up their own communities, and one of those communities is a place called Alamo. And one of my goals when I decided to take over, or I guess I would say reconfigure the series that my dad had started, was to take readers to different places on the Navajo reservation, places that my dad had not written about. And he had never written about Alamo, so I thought that gave me a good opportunity to do something new and to take readers to a different place. So that was the idea of bringing the Alamo reservation into a book, was one of the, I guess you'd say, the core ideas that I had when I started writing Stargazer. Yep.
So how do you choose, like, all three of your characters are so complex and dynamic and interesting. Also, I want to point out it's actually Thursday in case anybody wants to get a head start on the
Oh,
weekend. I was like, oh, cool, it's Friday. I'm fine taking tomorrow off. Peace out. But I'm kind of curious. So you have Joe, you have Jim, you have Bernie, and they're all so wonderful and they all appear in your books. But how do you choose who to center the book about?
Well, I try to give all of them equal time. And that's a real interesting question. I wasn't aware that I was going to do this when I started the series with the first novel, Spider-Woman's Daughter. After that book, I thought, well, gee, since Jim and Bernie work together, they're husband and wife, they should be able to solve crimes together. So I'll have them work on the same crime. So that was the theory I had when I started my second book, Rock with Wings. And I worked on that book, for 2 or 3 months, and it was just really awful. I couldn't get any traction. The writing was flat. The whole thing was just pretty dreadful. So I have a dog, and at that point I had a golden retriever, and she was a very good listener. So she and I would go out for walks in the morning and in the evening, and I would complain to her, and she would wag her tail and give me hope that I would figure this out. And on one of those walks, it dawned on me that Bernadette Manuelito had been the sweet young thing who brought coffee in and drove Jim Chee around with a broken leg in my dad's books. She never had really had the chance to be a crime solver on her own. So she was not going to be anybody's partner in crime solving. She had to have her own strong plot to move the story forward. So once I figured that out and I was able to rescue Rock with Wings, gave Bernie her own story, and then the book really flowed. So ever since then, I've been trying to balance between the three characters. And some of it depends on what the story, what the nugget of an idea is that I have for a plot. So in Stargazer, I was thinking about lying and thinking about lies that people tell to protect people they love. And that led me to think of Bernie in college and Bernie having an old friend and getting involved in a case because the old friend is telling what Bernie thinks is a lie. And it just seemed better. Well, I'd already done a Joe Leaphorn story, so this didn't seem like something that Joe would be comfortable with for Joe. And so I thought, well, this seems like a perfect story for Bernie. So in a way, that was how it happened. And I have to say, since Bernie was the character who kind of inspired me to take over these mysteries, she tends to whisper in my ear pretty loudly. I think more loudly than the guys do. So, and she was really whispering with Stargazer. So that was why it became her book.
And she's gone on such a journey. Like she's almost a detective now. Like she's really like solving crimes, but also there's a real sense, like in one of the opening scenes, there's a great moment where she has to clear cows from a road and she just has so much authority. You would not think of her as like a sweet young thing. Like she's a woman who has a mission.
Yeah, that's true. And I think as the series, she really has kind of come into her power as the series has progressed. I think in Spider-Woman's Daughter, I mean, she's strong, she solves the crime, but now in Stargazer, she's kind of come into her own power. And, it's funny, I feel like I'm talking about a relative or something, talking about her. Not just like a fictional character, like somebody who has dinner with me or something.
Well, she comes to you through your dog as well. So
yeah, right.
That helps. So Stargazer is interesting because it's about lies, but the lies aren't necessarily ones that are malintentioned. Can you talk a little bit more about that, but also how did you figure out, not to spoil, because everybody should go out and buy this book and read it. It's very twisty. So I'm not going to give away the twist, but you have a number of different suspects. And how do you decide which one is the actual culprit?
Oh, that's a really hard question. Actually, I was working on Stargazer. Oh, I was probably 75% done with, or thought 75% done with the book when it dawned on me that the person who I thought was the villain actually couldn't have done it. And so then, and in the meantime, there was another character, a person who had started out, and I'm purposely not using pronouns here, not to give anything away, but there was another person who had been letting me know that character deserved a bigger role, that there was more to that character, there was more to that character than I was letting the reader know. So I went back and I planted a few more clues about the character who ultimately turned out to be the villain, and maybe softened a little bit about the character who I thought was the villain who wasn't. And yeah, it's interesting. I know there are really good writers who write from outlines, and I very much admire that. And I think if I had done that, I wouldn't have run into this issue. But on second thought, I think if I had done that, the book might not have had as much suspense as it turned out to have, because I mean, I'm hoping that the reader will be as surprised as I was when he or she figures out who the villain is. I'm not sure that was your question, but
no, that kind of is. It's like, how do you, like, do you think you're actually solving the mystery while you're writing? Is that kind of what's going on?
In Stargazer, that was what was going on. I mean, in Stargazer, I knew who didn't do it, and I knew the motivation. I knew quite a few things. I knew, who some of the minor characters would be, and like I say, I thought I knew who did it, but I really didn't, because it just, as I was working with the words, and as the plot developed, it just dawned on me that person was too obvious, and also too nice to have actually committed murder. The other thing, I know earlier you were talking about liars, and I think the other kind of lie, or maybe deception, that a lot of us fall into is just not telling the whole story. And so in the Joe Leaphorn subplot, I was able to kind of bring out that facet of lying. I think readers who read the series starting with my dad probably know the character of Louisa Bourbonnais, who is Joe Leaphorn's housemate. And Joe and Louisa have a really interesting and close and friendly and respectful relationship. But there are things that they don't tell each other. And that is kind of where the other idea of deception, where I was able to use that in the Joe Leaphorn subplot. And again, I was kind of surprised at how that worked out, but I have to give my dad credit. There was a clue that my dad had planted in Hunting Badger about the character of Joe Leaphorn that I was able to elaborate on in Stargazer. So, and it doesn't, if readers haven't read my dad, it doesn't matter, but readers who have read Hunting Badger may say, oh, aha, I remember that from that book so many years ago. So.
Oh, that's really fun. How do you come up with the titles? Like, you keep saying Stargazer, 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 and it's such a great title because it both captures, the book itself features a lot of both astronomy, but also astrology and myths about the stars. But there's also this sense of somebody who's gazing at the stars, that they're a little bit with their head in the clouds. I think that applies to a number of the characters. How do you come up with, because with both, I've worked on this, and I'm also, this is a teaser, but Anne has another novel that's coming out next year that also has an equally great title. And they arrive in my inbox and they're so perfect. And I always wonder, like, I find titles really hard because, you have to do so much storytelling about both what the book is, who it's for. It helps. The title is the basics that our art department then goes and builds a cover around. So like, there's a lot of pressure on it, and yours are so good. So where does that come from? I'm just going to ask the impossible. It's fine.
It's funny, for Stargazer, the title really just came to me. And I think part of it came from the fact that the victim, and I can say this without giving anything away, the victim is an astronomer. And who the victim is and why he ends up dead is one of the mysteries that moves the plot forward. So in a way, that title was pretty easy. But like you're saying, then there's all of the other nuances of that title. And I think the other reason I liked it is because it gave me a chance to talk a lot about Navajo star lore. Mm-hmm. And that was a wonderful learning experience for me. I think those of us who've grown up in Western culture, most of what we learn about the stars is from Greek astronomy, and all the wonderful stories of Orion and the Pleiades and animals in the sky, the Big Dipper. And Navajo stories are kind of the same. A lot of them are hero stories, but the palette is bigger. Whereas we might have the Big Dipper, that constellation would be part of a whole larger picture of interaction of stars in the Navajo star lore. So, and thinking of Bernie, and Jim Chee, and certainly Joe Leaphorn, a lot of my characters who grew up in rural settings where they would be spending a lot of time outside in the summer, maybe herding sheep, maybe helping with crops, doing hard outdoor work, which also then would expose them to that beautiful night sky. I don't know. I love that title. And I have to say, I just happen to have one here. I love this cover. I love the blue of it, and I love this is called Big Snake, this constellation, and it's one of the main Navajo constellations. Anyway, I thought that the art department did a fabulous job on that cover.
Yeah, I love that cover too. I also want to remind everybody we're going to be doing like a Q&A after Anna and I have a chance to chat. So if you want to ask a question using the question function on your screen, we'll get to that once we've talked for a little bit more. And
also, if you are getting curious about the book, you can just punch that button and buy it.
Yes, there is a button where you can get 10% off. And basically, going back to the cover, like, I love the blues. I love how it kind of fits into what you've done by elevating Bernie to being one of the 3 characters in the series as opposed to 2 characters in the series. And it's almost adding to a very male world, adding femininity. There's something about those blues that even though blue is a masculine cover, the cover itself feels feminine to me in how they interplay. And there is a storyline in your book about missing and exploited Indigenous women. And I was curious if you would talk about that, and also both for the astronomy and the astrology, but also that piece of it, like, what sort of research do you do? How do you incorporate things that you find in the world around you? How much are you going out and searching? How much of this is information that you have already known, that you've wanted to have an opportunity to write about?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I find research is so seductive. That's really one of the challenges for me writing fiction. Before I wrote my first novel, I was a journalist, and then I did 4 nonfiction books. And so, of course, in nonfiction, research is everything. You have to be sure that you have it all correct. And in journalism too, I mean, you can really be embarrassed if you're interviewing someone and you haven't read the other interviews, you don't know their background. So when I switched to writing novels, research just was really second nature to me. And one of the great temptations for me in writing fiction is to remember that the whole point of the research is to find something interesting that ultimately will help move the plot along. That I'm not really writing a book about Navajo star lore or about all of the wonderful research that they do with the very large array. Oh, and I wanted to say one thing I love about this cover. I don't know if you all noticed, but down here there's a tiny, tiny telescope. And this is exactly the way those telescopes look that I talk about in the book. And the Very Large Array is, they're giant radio telescopes and they're mounted on railroad tracks. So as part of my research, I went down there to see them. I did a tour of the facility, had a chance to talk to the scientists. And the whole thing was just totally fascinating. The Very Large Array, in addition to being one of the first facilities to discover black holes, they also are listening for signals, maybe from intelligent life in the universe. So they work with what's called the SETI Institute. Anyway, I mean, I knew a little bit about it, and doing the research, I learned far more than anybody would want to know reading a mystery novel. But I feel it just makes me feel more confident, even though maybe I only use 5% of what I've learned. Just having that strong basis, I don't know, just helps me. I think helps me know just what to pick to kind of move the story along. And sometimes it's something that I do know a little something about. Another thing that I did some research on they're called star ceilings. And you find them a lot in early Pueblo and other sites that the indigenous people of the Southwest left behind. And some theories say that they think the ancient people were really trying to replicate the constellations. They would have long posts with a sponge at the top, and they would use that to make stars on these cave ceilings. And the thought is that a lot of them were used for ceremonial reasons, but some of them might have just been art. So anyway, I found all of that fascinating. Research is what I love, and where I have to tell myself, okay, stop. You're not writing a book about star ceilings. You're writing a mystery, and you've got to, get on with the story. So yeah.
So there's so much detail in your book, both the research parts about the world, but also all the police business. Do you fact check? Do you use experts? Like, how does that come together?
I do use experts. In fact, some of my experts they signed up to listen tonight. I have a wonderful retired FBI agent who lives in New Mexico, who is just such a wonderful resource. I mean, he knows so much about police procedure, about firearms, about the psychology of interviewing people. And his wife is a brilliant reader, and she often will find redundancies, commas in the wrong place, but she also really will read for content. And sometimes she'll say, you've already told us this a few times. You don't need to say this, or I mean, whatever it is, it's just so writing. I love writing, and I love the chance to just be in my office with my thoughts, with my imaginary friends. But it's wonderful to have a chance to show a work in progress to people who know the subject matter that I'm writing about, and who also kind of have respect for the creative process. So instead of saying, oh my gosh, this is awful, they'll say, I was kind of falling asleep here. It's a different way of giving criticism. And I have to say, I'm just really grateful to have smart beta readers who can tell me the truth when stuff doesn't work, and also say, this is a winter constellation, and you have it in the October sky, and Bernie wouldn't be able to see that, to correct me on little things like that. So it's really, really, really important for me to have people I trust who can make sure that, and you too, Sarah. I really appreciate good, gentle, and insightful editing. I think every writer needs that, just as every person kind of needs friends who say, wait a minute, I think you're drinking too much, or don't wear pink, it looks bad on you. You know, it's kind of the same with writers. You need people who will tell you the truth in a very gentle and supportive way. So.
I once likened, my sister is a playwright, and I once likened my role as an editor to being a sculptor. And she just looked at me and she was like, so you're saying I'm marble and you're Michelangelo? And I was like, no, 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 no. I think what's so fun for me as an editor is that I'm not a writer. I'm not somebody who can create stories from whole cloth. Like, my imagination doesn't work that way. What it does work is by seeing what somebody else has created. And then I've started using a different metaphor that I think is a little bit less offensive to writers, which is that I see myself as kind of the midwife. I'm the person, the book that comes out is your baby. And my role is to make it healthy, to make it strong, to make sure that the world, like, it goes into the world with the best chance at success that it has. So I kind of see all of like the gentle pushing and prodding and all of that as my role in bringing your child, which is your book, into the world where it can meet all of these wonderful readers who have embraced you.
That's a lovely metaphor. I really like that. Yeah, I think there's not a writer born who doesn't need a good editor. So yeah, it's really nice to be able to talk to you about this. You know, the other thing that I was really surprised about is how helpful it is to get comments from readers. I know several times readers will say, gee, I really like this book, and have you thought about doing such and such? And I always, when I get those emails, I try to always write back and say, no, I haven't. And sometimes I say, that's a great idea. And sometimes I just say, thank you for sharing, but some of those really are good ideas. So it's that kind of feedback is wonderful. And that's one thing that, as much as I love technology and the fact that people can, be watching us in their own living rooms with their cats on their lap or whatever, doing in-person events is maybe even more wonderful, because afterwards people can come up and you can actually have a conversation with them. Whereas, here people can send in their questions, and I hope people will, but it's that kind of give and take, and, seeing somebody's expression, getting the nuances that go with the questions, that's really important. And it's really helpful. It's funny being a writer, because there's so much basically quiet, introverted time. And then you put on sort of your, you're here I am, and here's my new baby. Let's have the party. Let's have the baptism party, or whatever it is. And, you're showing off your work, and people say, oh, well, she's pretty cute, but, there's some slobber on her chin, or whatever you say. It's like, anyway, it's like kind of a schizophrenic life to go from being quiet, just, day by day by yourself, to all of a sudden you're talking to, 50 strangers.
I feel like reading is a similar thing in that it's this very solitary pursuit, and yet you form a community of like-minded readers and people who love both books and genres and areas. Like, I think about my dad's best friend from college, who's the one who moved to New Mexico. He had some sort of communion with New Mexico through a book, and they started just going there on vacation, and they lived in upstate New York, and they were like, oh, this is so much better. Like, I never want to shovel my driveway again. And now we're in New Mexico. So I do think that there's an interesting thing where you create these worlds in private that we consume in private, and then we form a community in public together about it.
Yeah. One of my favorite things is talking to book clubs. It's just so interesting to hear how different people react to different parts of a book, and then to hear the interplay between, somebody will say, oh, I had never thought of that. And the other person will say, well, what did you think? And then they say, well, I thought such and such. Or they'll say, well, I didn't even get that at all. It's fascinating for me as an author to see how people bring insights to, say, scenes or plot twists that I hadn't even thought of. It's like, readers are so smart. That's what always makes me think that every book I write has to be the best book, because I just, I mean, people are out there. There are people out there who know more about astronomy than I do, people who know more about everything than I do. So that's why I think, going back to your research question, that's why research is so important to me. I really try to get all the facts right, so people don't get distracted with that and can really focus on figuring out who done it and why.
Well, I hope I can share this, but I got a call the other day, and usually when you get calls to the office from a reader of a book, you're always kind of like, uh-oh, like what's going to happen? Usually they're yelling at you either because there was a misprint in the book, or they were mad about something that happened and they wanted to tell you about it. And both of those are like, I'm totally like, I always will be polite. I will answer questions. Like if somebody has a misprint in their book, we'll correct the misprint. If it was something that we can like give you a replacement copy, we'll do that, etc. But this one was this man, and he was like, so I am a retired professor of astronomy. And I went double uh-oh. And he was like, I would just like to send Ann Hillerman a letter. Can I send that to you? And I was like, do I want to give this, like, if we had been not in this virtual world, I would have been like, just send a letter to the office. I'll forward it after I have a chance to read it. I won't have to give you any personal information of mine. So I gave him my email. And then I get it. And it is just a page of glowing praise for the book about the care with which you handled the astronomy part of the book, but also just gratitude for shedding light on a part of the world that he's devoted his life to that isn't really a sexy fiction space. And it was just so lovely that like your book went out into the world and found this person who saw himself being seen in that book.
Oh, I'm so glad you told me that. What a lovely, lovely story. Yeah. That there near the Very Large Array, there is an astronomy there. Let me go back. There's a town near the Very Large Array that has an astronomy club. And it used to be they would go out, I think 4 times a year, and set up maybe 20 or 25 telescopes. And the whole idea was that people should come and maybe see the rings of Saturn for the first time, or look closely at the craters of the moon, or, whatever it was. These were people with that deep passion for the stars, for the planets, just wanting to share it with, the average guy. And of course, I was all set to do that right before the pandemic hit. But now that things are better, I think they're going to be starting that up again. So I'm really looking forward to going out and, meeting some of these people who love astronomy and love to look at the dark night sky.
And also, I've never been to the Very Large Array, but I went to the peak of Mauna Kea in Hawaii, where you're like, there's something about being that close to the heavens. And what's amazing about it is it's this place of science. They're doing real serious science there, but yet it's also a place of profound spirituality and movement. Like, I think that that's a really amazing space in which astronomy and astrology are both about being part of this thing that is so much bigger than yourself and bigger, this world that's bigger.
Yeah, I agree. That was one of the real joys to me of writing Stargazer. I need to tell you another story. One funny thing that happened. A lot of times authors get asked if they will donate, say, the right to use a person's name at an auction. Somebody can bid and then their name gets in the book. So I did that with the book that became Stargazer. And the guy, it was a benefit for the New Mexico Children's Foundation. And the guy who bought the naming rights was a doctor, very nice guy, probably middle-aged or maybe a little past middle age. And so he invited me to meet him to have a drink, which was really a good thing. and meeting him, and well, the drink too, but both of them. Anyway, and he was telling me how he had loved Joe Leaphorn, kind of like your story. He, had read all the Joe Leaphorn books, and Joe Leaphorn was his favorite character. So in the book, I was able to use his name as the name for a little boy who gets to sit next to Joe Leaphorn on a plane. And the little boy is nervous, and Joe Leaphorn holds his hand. And so this doctor, and he was kind of nervous about me using his name as a little boy, but he sent me an email afterwards, and he said, "Oh, I was so proud to see my name there, and thank you for letting me hold hands with Joe Leaphorn."
That's really sweet. I see we have a question, which is, did your dad know about your love of writing, and did he encourage you?
Yes, absolutely. My dad, well, both my dad and my mom were really, they were really in love with the power of words. And so when I was in school, and I was, we are in the first grade, you write a story, me and my dog or whatever. My parents were so supportive of even those beginning writings. And so I would read them, show them the story, me and my dog. And, my dad would, he would say, "Oh, you did a good job." And then he would say, "Next time, instead of saying, your dog, the dog laid in the shade of a tree, why don't you say your dog laid in the shade of a cottonwood tree?" And then whoever's reading the story could actually get a better idea of what the tree was. And I'm thinking, at the time, I thought, "Oh, sure, that's a good idea." But looking back at it, I bet there aren't many kids who have parents who have that kind of really insight into how to make a story work. And the same with my mom. My mom was an avid reader. She was my dad's first and best editor, but more than that, she kept notebooks. Every book she read, certainly as an adult, she would write, the title, the author, and then maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs about, maybe a paragraph about what the book was about, and then a paragraph of her impression of it. And sometimes, she would say, this was a wonderful book, and I really liked, the way the author integrated science. Or sometimes she would say, this was a book in which there were, the story moved too slow, and I was able, it would have been better if the author had developed the character of Mary Jane, or, and I thought, what insightful reading that was, and how important it was to her to have kept all those notebooks. I bet there were 30 years of notebooks.
Wow.
So, I just think it was like in the stars that I would become a writer, growing up with parents like that, who really nurtured and supported my love of writing.
That's such a gift to give you, as like this, it seems like you have 2 gifts. One, you have this legacy of your father's books where you can be inside his imagination. And then with those notebooks that your mother kept, like a way of being inside her mind in this very intimate way. How beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and a way of telling your child books matter, writing matters, getting it right, getting the right words matters. So I think it's really important for parents and grandparents to read to their kids and to share our passion for good books with kids. Today, when I was growing up, there was no internet.
Mm-hmm.
There was no YouTube, no Hulu, no, Netflix, none of that. And I think now there are so many more distractions for kids that if we want our kids to be readers and to really value good stories, we have to share our own passion for good books and good stories with them.
Yeah, I did that when my son was maybe about 1 or 2. I realized I read a lot on my phone. It's a really awful habit. I picked it up on the subway because you always have your phone so you can read a book. And I realized that if he was doing that, even if I was reading a book, he was just seeing me on my phone. So I started buying more books so that he could see me reading a book physically, so that he knew that there was a real almost like a connection to it, that not like a book is different from a phone or a TV or a tablet or whatever. I think like the reverence for that.
Yeah. I think when kids are little, that distinction is really important.
So when you read for yourself, what do you find? Do you find that you read a lot of mysteries, or are you like, no, 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 I need to read nonfiction. I need something totally different.
Oh, I do read a lot of nonfiction as part of the research for my novels. And I read novels, I get, it's both a blessing and a curse, I guess. A lot of beginning writers, people who are just being published, ask me if I will read their books, and if I like them, give them a little endorsement. And some of those books are really wonderful, I have to say. And some of those writers are people who deserve a lot more attention than they normally get. You know, it's tough for a first novel. People don't know who you are. Chances are, I mean, any publisher like Harper or a university press, you know, you have to kind of wait and see what happens with a person's career. So a lot of times those books don't get a lot of promotion. So I am always thrilled when I come across a book like that really is just a wonderful book. And I have fingers and toes crossed that those writers will go on and have big careers. So that's what I read those. And then I do read a lot of mysteries. I go to a lot of conferences, and I run into maybe writers who I had never heard of, and I hear them speak, and their passion for their books then kind of makes me think, oh, I ought to go out and buy them and read them. So yeah, I do read a lot of I don't have as much time as I used to have for reading, because now I'm so busy writing and doing the research for my own books. But yeah, when I have time to read, I like to read all kinds of stuff. I also like to read books that friends recommend to me. You know, if somebody says to me, I read this book and it's a romance, but I think you'd really like it, then I read it. I like to read cross genre because I learn a lot, and and I think it's kind of a break for my brain for always trying to figure out who did it, to just think, oh, I know they're gonna be in love by the end of this book.
So we have one new question, which is, do you have a certain process with your writing?
I do. It's a very messy process. I start writing a letter to myself about the new book. And in that letter, I try to say, why am I writing this? What do I want to accomplish with this book? And I say, you know, who is going to be the main crime solver? Where will the setting be? Who should the villain be? And I try to make it, make the villain not a stereotype. Villains are hard for me, but I try to come up with a person for whom the reader would have some sympathy. And maybe, though, you know, they're doing something awful, sort of understand how that twisted mind could somehow work. Anyway, I write myself that letter, which is not exactly like an outline, but at least it serves as a guidepost if I get lost as I'm working on the novel. And then for the first draft, I just start with chapter 1, and I try to always start with action, and then write every day and just keep working on it, even if it seems like it's going nowhere. I know there are people who say, you know, they can binge write. They just write, I don't know, 12, 15 hours a day, day after day after day, night after night after night. I find that after 4 or 5 hours, my brain is just done. Then I have to go for a walk or do the dishes or go to yoga class or do something else. But I also find as the process goes on that even when I'm not writing, part of my unconscious mind is still thinking of the story. So when I sit down the next day, if I'm lucky, I'll have some ideas that I can put in where I'm continuing the story. I usually start with maybe 10 or 15 minutes of rereading what I've written the previous day to kind of prime the pump and remind me of where I was in the story. It's real important to me when I'm doing a first draft to write every day. Otherwise, I just lose my momentum. And so I kind of slug it through to the end. The other thing, if I come to a point where I need to do research, say, like in Stargazer, where cows are on the road, then I'm thinking, okay, who deals with this? Is it the Navajo police? Is it the livestock board? Is it the Animal Humane Association? I don't know. I just kind of mark the text, because I know if I do research, then next thing I know, I'm going to be looking at cute pictures of kitties in cages and. So,
and then you'll have a cat, and then
yeah. So first drafts are really hard for me. And then when I'm done, I go back, and then the fun starts. Then I can add more poetry, add more tension, take out the stuff that doesn't work, tighten up the dialogue, take out some dialogue, put in more dialogue. I don't know. All of that stuff that really happens when I'm working on the second draft and the third draft and the revisions. So yeah, that's my process. I try to not be too self-critical in the first draft. I think that's to give my inner editor something else to do so I can just get the story on paper. Mm-hmm. And then I can go back and hopefully add some finesse and add the poetry.
Do you have rules in your book of things that your characters can do and things that you won't have them do? Like, particularly when you're dealing with books that involve crimes, are there things that you want to make sure that your characters are doing when they're pursuing I guess the villains, for lack of a better term, the bad guys? And also, are there things like Bernie shoots a gun, and are there things that you don't want her to do, or any of your other characters? Are there limits to them, and are those like established, or do they happen in the moment when you're like, oh, that wouldn't happen, that doesn't feel right?
That's a really good question. I don't like reading graphic violence, so I don't write graphic violence. I mean, I guess that's like one of my baseline rules. The other thing, and this was a rule that my dad never had any sex. He never even had kissing in his book. So in Spider-Woman's Daughter, I have Jim Chee and Bernie sharing a kiss. And I have a little more physical contact. I mean, I guess maybe I've moved from, if Dad's books were rated G when it came to having Bernie in a negligee, mine are maybe PG, maybe even PG plus a little bit. But I mean, that's those, I guess, no, not Bernie in a negligee and not graphic violence. I think those are probably my two ground rules. I try to be respectful of police procedure because I think it's important. I mean, my characters are law enforcement people, and they're good law enforcement people. I think with a lot of what's happened lately, it's kind of nice for readers to think, yeah, these are cops with a strong moral compass, and they're not going to be using a chokehold. They're not beating up anybody. I mean, they might lose their temper, but they totally act as professionals. And that again is really important to me in my books. I would never purposely kill a dog or a horse, because I think you just don't do that in fiction. I guess those are the main things. And like your question implied, sometimes as I'm writing the book, the ideas come to me. In the book that I just finished, the title of that is The Sacred Bridge. Jim Chee discovers a body. And so I'm thinking, what does this body look like? And this is where my dislike of graphic bloody descriptions or gruesome descriptions kind of came in. I mean, this I'm sure it's not an attractive body, but I think I was able to imply that the guy is seriously dead without making the readers close the book and turn on the TV.
As somebody who reads your books multiple times as my work, I very much appreciate that, since I do not like any sort of graphic violence at all. Like, I feel like there's enough darkness that we can find in the world we live in. Why invite it into our recreation? So we have time for one more question, if anyone has one that they want to ask. In the meantime, you mentioned your next book, The Sacred Bridge. So do you want to give a little bit of a teaser?
Well, sure. I'd be glad to. So Sacred Bridge is a book in which Jim Chee gets to be the main crime solver, although Bernie does still have a big role. And it's set at Lake Powell. It involves Rainbow Bridge, which is a very sacred site to the Navajo, to the Ute, to a lot of the Pueblo people, to the Paiutes, to many of the tribes that traditionally lived in what was Glen Canyon, which now, of course, has become Lake Powell. So I'm able to talk about some of the archaeology of the Lake Powell area in this book. The book also takes Jim Chee to part of the Navajo reservation that I had never written about and that my dad never wrote about, called Navajo Mountain. And this is an area that borders Lake Powell. It's very remote and beautiful, and the people who live there are very entrepreneurial. But they're also traditional. So it was a great place for me to be able to set this story. I'm also able to take the readers to Antelope Canyon, which again borders Lake Powell, but it's on Navajo land. And that's where the story opens with Jim Chee and Bernie and Bernie's sister Darlene doing a little tour of Antelope Canyon. The Bernadette Manuelito story was one of these ripped from the headlines things. The Navajo Nation a couple years ago had an incident involving illegal cannabis cultivation. And so I used that as sort of the launching point for Bernie's story. And it was really interesting to me to be, writing about cannabis and legal growing and medical marijuana and the research into cannabis as an herb that can really promote health as well as something for recreation and etc. So yeah, I guess that's the name comes from Rainbow Arch, but it also involves the Navajo notion of kinship and of bridging generations and bridging stereotypes. So again, I really love that title, and it was so fortunate that it was able to reflect not only the physical sacred bridge, Rainbow Arch, but also kind of the metaphysical and emotional bridges that the story involves. And I'm now doing the revisions, which Sarah has suggested, of which are really brilliant and are going to make the book even better than it was when I turned it in.
Yes, it's really good. I very much loved reading it and was very surprised, but also was like, oh, I should have known at the ending, which is the best feeling with a mystery. So I feel like I've thrown a lot of questions at you. Is there something that we haven't touched on that you feel like is important to understanding Stargazer?
Oh, that's a great question. One thing about when I wrote Stargazer, Stargazer involves a lot of time driving because, like my dad, because I use real sites. It's a long way from Bernie's base in Shiprock, New Mexico, down to Socorro, New Mexico. And she has to go to Socorro because that's where the crime happens that involves one of her friends. So that gives Bernie a long time in the car. And I was concerned, how can I use this time? Should I just telescope it? But it dawned on me that actually that period in the car gave me time to talk a little bit more about the beautiful scenery and its connection to Navajo stories. And it also gave me time to let Bernie sharpen her skills as a detective and as an interviewer, because she has the suspect in the back seat of her car as they're doing this driving, and Bernie's trying to soften her up. And anyway, I had a lot of fun writing that scene. And I think it was a case where the physical geography that I had imposed on the story gave me a chance to kind of develop that part of Bernie's character. So I hope that when readers read that, they'll enjoy it as much as I did as I was writing it.
One of the things talking about her in the car and driving reminds me, what's great about Stargazer is you also give her this kind of community of other female police officers. So tell me about how you positioned her, and because obviously Jim has Joe Leaphorn. Who do you see being Bernie's mentors as a female police officer?
Oh, I love that question. as the readers probably know, and as I'm learning, there are more and more women now in law enforcement. And one of my prime helpers in envisioning what it would be like for a woman in law enforcement was a detective who worked for the Santa Fe Police Department. And I remember when I first talked to her, asking her what her motivation was for, because she's a single mom. I mean, it's a really tough job. And, I said to her, why did you go into law enforcement? And she said, I just want to make the world better. I want to make it better for my kids. Mm. And so in a way, women like her are Bernie's mentors. Bernie like all law enforcement people need to go to continuing education programs. And when Bernie goes to those, she buddies up with other women in other law enforcement agencies. And the woman who eventually involves her in the crime that forms the basis for Stargazer is a sheriff's deputy whom she met at one of these law enforcement conferences. And so the woman there, law enforcement is always shorthanded. So, and this because the woman confessed to the crime in Shiprock, Bernie's friend invites her to come down and help her with the interviews and help her make some inroads into the Navajo community down there, thinking wisely that people would respond better to a woman who spoke some Navajo and a woman who could kind of understand the culture rather than just another white cop. So I would say that woman, not exactly Bernie's mentor, but certainly someone that Bernie can talk to about the challenges of being a woman in what is still basically a male world.
And also having her husband as her boss, which is its own complication.
Right. That's right. And I think any working woman if you're in the same profession as your spouse, you just dread that would ever happen. So I think Bernie's situation is something that a lot of working women can relate to. Or even if it's not a spouse, if it's a good friend, if it's somebody who's been who you've been working with on the same level, and all of a sudden they're up here, maybe because they're a guy and you're down here because you're not a guy. It's natural friction.
So I think we're almost at the end of our time. If anybody else has a question, and if there's any parting words you want to give.
I would just say I just feel so enormously lucky, blessed, I don't know what you would call it, to have been able to have reinvented myself in my 60s and to have a wonderful new career working with these characters who I loved as a child. I mean, I felt like I really grew up with Jim Chee and Joe Leaphorn. So, and I loved writing nonfiction, but I have to say I like writing fiction even more. So, and I think for all of us, having just been through, what we've been through, it's really nice to have some pleasant diversion. So I would say reading novels, it's not just fun. Novels really are brain food. I think you learn a lot. All of us, I learn a lot reading novels. So I would just encourage people to read and buy your books from Barbara's or get them at the library, but just make reading really part of your life. I think it's just so good for all of us on so many, many levels. So, and thanks to everybody who was listening tonight or people who, pick this up later on YouTube. It's been such a pleasure, Sarah, to talk with you tonight. Thank you for tearing yourself away from your dinner and your son and your
Well, thankfully, I'm able to DVR Top Chef, so I will be watching that later. But this was way more fun. Thank you so much, Anne, for letting me pick your brain for this past hour. Thank you to Barbara's for hosting us. Just a reminder, you can buy a copy through Barbara's for 10% off using the code EVENT. There are a ton of links in the chat to follow up, but thank you again. And everybody enjoy your Thursday night.
Right. Thank you.